It's strange how some moments can completely rewrite your understanding of a person. For the longest time, Nathan was nothing more than the guy who drove me to and from work every day, professional, polite, always behind the wheel of that sleek black car, his eyes fixed on the road, never lingering on me too long. But there was something about him, something beneath the surface that caught my attention the moment I really looked. I had never been one to entertain the idea of relationships with people who worked for me. There's a kind of professional distance that keeps things simple, but Nathan, with his quiet charm and those sharp eyes that seemed to see more than just the road ahead, began to chip away at that barrier. It started subtly, a glance in the rear-view mirror that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. A brief smile when I cracked a joke about the traffic or the weather. But it wasn't just the physical proximity of being in the car together every day. It was something in the air between us, a spark that I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. It came to a head one afternoon after a particularly long day at the office. The sky had turned a soft orange as the sun began to set, and Nathan drove me home as he usually did, the hum of the engine filling the quiet between us. I leaned back in the leather seat, tired from a day full of meetings, and just as I closed my eyes to relax, I felt his eyes on me through the rear-view mirror. This time, there was something different in his gaze. It was almost as if he were waiting for something, waiting for me to notice. The air in the car felt heavier, charged, and for the first time, I felt my heart rate quicken. "Long day?" Nathan asked, his voice smooth and low, sending a shiver down my spine. I nodded, my breath catching for just a second. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't say anything for a while, but the silence felt different. It wasn't uncomfortable, but there was an undercurrent of something that made me feel like I was being pulled in a direction I wasn't sure I should go. As the car pulled up to my house, I glanced at him, meeting his gaze in the mirror once again. There it was, the unmistakable pull of desire, both of us acknowledging without a single word being spoken. I wasn't used to feeling this way, not with Nathan, not with anyone. But when he turned off the engine and looked at me directly, something in the pit of my stomach told me that this was more than just a fleeting moment. "Have a good night," he said softly, his words heavy with something unspoken. I paused for a moment, considering my options. I could play it cool, pretend I hadn't noticed a shift in the air between us. But something told me that wouldn't work, not this time. Instead, I smiled, a little more than I normally would, and said, "Maybe I'll take you up on that offer for a drink sometime." Nathan's lips curved into a smile that was both knowing and reluctant, as if he had been waiting for me to say those words all along. "I'd like that," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a dangerous game we were playing, one that neither of us could walk away from easily. As I stepped out of the car and walked to my front door, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle in. The tension between us wasn't going to fade. It was just the beginning. Little did I know, that was only the first of many moments where the lines between professional and personal would blur. The days that followed were filled with an undeniable tension. Every time Nathan drove me, there was something in the air between us, like we were dancing around something we both wanted, but neither was ready to claim. The next morning, I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. I couldn't help it. The way his eyes had met mine in the rearview mirror, the smoothness of his voice, the unspoken connection between us that lingered even after I left the car. I couldn't push it away. I tried to keep my mind focused on work, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan's face. His presence had become more than just a background detail of my day. It was becoming a part of it. I caught myself wondering what it would be like if we crossed the line, if I allowed myself to explore whatever it was that simmered between us. By the time evening came, I was ready for something to happen, but I wasn't sure what. I tried to keep it casual when I texted him, "Hey, Nathan, you busy tonight?" I didn't expect him to reply right away, but he did, almost immediately. "Not really. What's up?" I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could feel my heart racing, my mind a blur of conflicting thoughts. But I couldn't back out now. I was thinking about that drink you mentioned. Want to grab something? The response came quickly, and this time there was a trace of something in his words that made my pulse spike. I thought you'd never ask. I'll pick you up at 8. I couldn't help but smile, the nervous excitement bubbling in my chest. This was happening. I didn't know where it would lead, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. At 8 p.m., I stood by the front door, waiting for him. My mind raced, each passing second adding to the anticipation. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made my heart skip. I glanced out the window, and sure enough, there he was, Nathan, looking every bit the part of a man who was about to change everything. He stepped out of the car, his presence commanding in a way I hadn't quite expected. The jacket he wore clung to his frame, and the confident yet casual way he approached my door sent a surge of heat through my veins. "Ready?" he asked, his smile a little too charming, his eyes glinting with something more than just politeness. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Yeah, let's go." The drive to the bar was filled with light conversation, but there was an underlying current that neither of us was willing to acknowledge outright. When we reached the venue, we both got out of the car, and for a moment, neither of us moved. We were standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, close enough to hear his breath quicken just a fraction as our eyes met. Then, without a word, Nathan reached out, his hand brushing mine in a touch that was both casual and intimate, and I felt a jolt of electricity race through me. I turned my hand just slightly, giving him the opportunity to hold it, and he took it. The night went by in a blur of laughter and conversation, but underneath it all, there was a growing tension between us, something I couldn't deny. As the hours passed, the bar started to empty out, and we were left in a quiet corner, just the two of us. I didn't want to leave, and I could tell Nathan felt the same. "You're not as cold as I thought you were," he said with a smirk, leaning in slightly as he took a sip of his drink. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And what made you think that?" His lips twitched into a smile. "You seem guarded, but I'm beginning to see the other side of you." I felt my pulse quicken at his words. "I'm not so easily read, Nathan." He leaned in closer, the heat of his body drawing me in. "Are you sure about that?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words got caught in my throat as I realized just how close we were. His eyes locked on mine, dark with something I couldn't identify, but that sent a rush of desire straight through me. The kiss deepened, our tongues exploring, moans and gasps echoing through the room. Nathan's hands roamed over my body, tracing the contours of my back, his touch igniting a fire within me. I reached for his hair, pulling him closer, my fingers tangling in the soft strands. We broke apart for a moment, our breaths ragged, our eyes locked in a silent conversation. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face, and he leaned in to whisper against my lips, "Let's go upstairs." Upstairs, in the cool embrace of the bedroom, we shed our clothes, our bodies moving in a synchronized dance of desire. Nathan's hands found their way to my chest, his fingers tracing circles around my nipples, sending shivers down my spine. I reached for his waistband, pulling down his jeans, revealing the evidence of his arousal. He guided me toward the bed, his hands gently pushing me down onto the soft sheets. I reached for him, pulling him on top of me, our bodies fitting together like two pieces of a puzzle. He moved slowly at first, his lips trailing kisses down my neck, his hands exploring every inch of my skin. As he moved within me, a wave of pleasure washed over me, and I cried out Nathan's name, my voice hoarse with desire. He responded with a groan, his movements becoming more urgent, more desperate. We reached our peak together, a shared explosion of sensation that left us breathless and spent. We lay on the bed for a long moment, our hearts still racing, our bodies bathed in the afterglow of passion. Nathan pulled me close, his arms wrapped around me, and I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't experienced in a long time. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't help but breathe a little shakily. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was a quiet understanding between us, a mutual recognition that this moment had changed everything. "Are you okay?" Nathan asked, his voice low, as though he were waiting for me to pull back, to break the moment. But I didn't want to. "I'm more than okay," I whispered, my breath still uneven. I wasn't sure what I was feeling, confusion, excitement, anticipation, but it didn't matter. All I knew was that I wanted more of this. More of him. Nathan looked at me for a moment longer, his gaze intense and searching, as though he were trying to decipher the thoughts swirling in my mind. "You sure?" he asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything else. There was no going back now. He didn't say anything more. Instead, he took my hand and led me out of the bar, the cool night air brushing against my skin as we stepped onto the street. The city lights cast long shadows, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. The drive back to my place was silent, but not uncomfortable. Every so often, I glanced at him, and every time, I saw that same spark in his eyes. The connection was undeniable, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. When we arrived at my apartment, Nathan parked the car, but neither of us moved to get out right away. We sat there for a long moment, the quiet of the night enveloping us. The tension in the car was palpable, almost suffocating in its intensity. Finally, Nathan turned to me, his hand gently cupping my face, his thumb brushing over my skin. His touch was tender, but there was something deeper beneath it, something raw, something that made my heart race. "Do you want to come in?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question hanging in the air between us. Nathan's lips curved into a slow, teasing smile, but there was no hesitation in his response. "I think we both know where this is heading." He was right. There was no denying it anymore. The space between us had shrunk to nothing, and neither of us was willing to ignore what was happening. I opened the door and stepped out, my legs feeling a little unsteady, but the desire I felt for him outweighed any doubts. Nathan followed me inside, his presence filling the small apartment. As soon as the door closed behind us, he took a step forward, his hand sliding down my back and pulling me closer. My breath hitched as our bodies collided, the heat between us growing more intense with every passing second. For a moment, we just stood there, lost in the rhythm of each other's breaths, each touch, each glance. I could feel the magnetic pull between us, drawing me in, pulling me closer to something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but something I couldn't resist. "I don't want to rush this," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "But I need you to know." Nathan silenced my doubts with a kiss, his lips firm yet achingly tender, conveying an unspoken promise that this wasn't just an impulsive leap. It was a deliberate step into something deeper. His touch spoke volumes, a quiet reassurance that he saw me, understood me, and wanted me wholly. As he pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine, I could feel the warmth of his breath mingling with my own. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice a soft murmur that carried the weight of certainty. "But I need you to be sure, too." His words settled in my chest, a mix of comfort and challenge. My heart hammered against my ribs, but not with fear, with clarity. In this moment, I wasn't clouded by doubt or hesitation. I knew what I wanted. I wanted him. I wanted us. I reached up, my fingers threading into his hair, as I pulled him closer, closing the small space between us. His arms encircled me, drawing me firmly against him. The heat of his body radiated into mine, a grounding force that anchored me in the here and now. Everything about this moment felt right. The world around us blurred into insignificance, as though nothing else existed but the two of us. It wasn't just passion, it was belonging. It was a sense that, after all the searching, we had both found our place. Together,